Welcome, everyone, to the first episode of the Commander Replay podcast. So this is the first episode of the new podcast. The plan is to have rotating guests, but we will definitely be seeing a lot of today's guest in future episodes as well. So let me introduce today's guest, Peter, also known as MonoWhiteBorder on Twitter. Peter, welcome. Why don't you tell us a bit about yourself, when you started playing, and what you like to play?
Yeah, thanks. So I started playing grade school, and I played really off and on for most of grade school into high school. Again, off and on. Went to college, kind of fell out, and then in college is when I really got introduced to Commander and played a lot of Commander and dove headfirst and been playing since then pretty consistently. I've never really jumped off the Commander bandwagon since I started. I play a lot of, obviously, I play a lot of mono white decks. And then I just play a ton of fair magic. Like, I like tribal decks, I like removal, and I like being the reactive player rather than the proactive player.
Sweet. What
So I'm the
year?
person, yeah.
What year do you think you started playing Commander?
I usually pick RTR as my starting point.
Okay.
That's when I really started playing consistently. Sorry, that's for standard. And then let's see. I started playing Commander in what was it? 2016, 2015, 2016. I don't know
Okay.
what set was out during then because I wasn't really like buying cards. I just was using my collection I had before.
I got you. So I started around 2011, right around the time of the first Commander product. So I think you were playing
Right.
probably a bit around that time with at least some of the other stuff, and then yeah, I can't remember. I think like cons or something, and whatever else was SOI was probably 2016. Cool. And
Yeah.
What kind of power level do you like to play at?
I usually go by like precon as the baseline, and I think most of my decks are like slightly above precon level. I'm like when I win, I steal a lot of games, right? So like I'm never the player who like plays a bunch of tokens and then slams down a Crater Hoof. I'm like the board's been wiped 3 times, everyone's at like sub 10 life totals, and then I somehow like find a way to enchant a win with like a 2/2 flyer. But I also have a fair number of decks that are like sub precon level. So like I have a mono red dwarf deck and like a mono or a skeleton tribal deck. I have a deck that's graveyard themed, so it's all cards that are set in a literal graveyard.
Nice.
So I definitely I'm lower on the power level curve for sure.
Cool. So I'm sort of the opposite. I've definitely crept up in power over time. And I think there's a lot of interesting discussion that we can have on a lot of stuff because, I get so ingrained in what I'm doing. I do often forget that like other people play different ways than me. And,
Right.
I think that's a thing that's like true of a lot of Commander players, I think, too.
Mhm.
So I am interested to hear your thoughts on a lot of different things, especially as we get going into our topic. And I guess that's the perfect segue. So today's topic is, did white get better in 2020? We're going to have some other discussions around, what cards came out, look at some of the other colors, and try to answer the question, did white get better, and is it getting better fast enough? I think are the two main questions
Mhm.
that we're looking at. What's your first take on, did white get better in 2020?
Well, I think for sure, and I think I've talked about this before, but like for sure in a vacuum, white's gotten better, right? You can't print more cards and a color get worse. I don't think it's possible. It'll at least stay the same. But in a vacuum, I think it's gotten better. Now, usually when people talk about power level, they're talking about relative to the other colors. And I don't know if white's like if you're imagining it as like a drag race. I don't know if white's caught up to anybody. Like if it's gotten closer to anybody.
Yeah,
Um,
and that's actually
I
a really good metaphor, and that's kind of the one I've been using. Like, I've been talking about just like if we're driving down the road, every other
mhm,
color is doing like 70 miles an hour on the highway, and pre 2020, I felt like white was doing about 45, and just
right.
watching everyone, fly past them and just get farther and farther ahead. My general feeling after 2020 is that I think white is now doing relatively the same speed as the other
Mhm,
colors. Maybe it's 5 or 10 miles an hour slower, but it's like
mhm,
much closer to what everyone else is doing. Just that I still think, if you have two cars traveling the same speed, it's still 5 miles back. So if you want to
right.
be, up to where everyone else is, you have to actually like accelerate, faster than they're going. And, my take is that I haven't really seen that happen yet. But there have been a lot of good cards that have come out, and I like the metaphor, but it's also not a perfect metaphor because like there's some things that I don't know. We'll get into some stuff, but I like what you said there about environment versus vacuum, right?
Right.
Like Lightning Bolt is a card that in a vacuum looks fine, but in an environment can completely warp the environment around it. Like, does your creature have 3 toughness or less? Okay, it doesn't matter because Lightning Bolt is in this format and it's just going to die to a lightning bolt.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And you can make arguments for white both ways where in a vacuum, yeah, these cards look great, but you do also have 3 other opponents at the table in a game of Commander, so like the things you're doing need to be impactful relative to what they're doing.
I think there's been a lot of really cool and interesting cards printed in 2020. Like there's been a lot of cards that personally excite me, whether it's from a Mel perspective or a Vorthos perspective. But
Yeah,
is it the responsibility of Wizards to print cards that work in the format of Commander for White, or is White just not a good color in Commander because of how the format's structured? And
there's
that's a tough question.
yeah, it is a tough question. However, going back to the should WotC do this question,
Mhm.
what I would say to that is that we're literally asking them for a thing. We're asking them for a product. We're telling them exactly what we want, and they're not giving it to us, which is sort
Right.
of just bad business, right? Like, you
Yeah.
know how many packs would fly off the shelves if they just printed like the most insane white card draw and ramp card? Like,
Mhm.
it'll sell packs like there's no tomorrow, and it seems like such an easy win, but they just refuse to do it. So like just from a pure like let's make some money standpoint, they're kind of holding back on, what seems like a very good money making opportunity. People might begrudge them for trying to make money, but like I want them to be profitable and successful and like continuing to make the game. So there's that stuff, but then there's the whole like color pie argument and the health of the game. And sure, you probably like printing a white Rishkar's expertise or a white Zendikar Resurgent might be a little dangerous. That has ramifications that may not be great in the long term health of the game and like what the color pie means and this and that. Not saying it shouldn't have any draw or any ramp at all, but just printing like a straight up green card into white, maybe that's not the best. But you mentioned cards that you were excited about. What cards were you most excited about in 2020? Or you can go as far back as Throne of Eldraine, so like standard legal forward.
So a card, well, this card's not 2020, but a card coming out in 2021 is Halvar, God of Battle. That card is really exciting to me,
Yeah,
just
that card's
from a
exciting to me
perspective of
too. That card looks awesome.
I love an equipment in the zone. There was a fair amount of Zendikar cards that interested me that weren't like the rares. So Attended Healer is just a token producer that you get a 1/1 cat every time you gain life. Like all the gain life payoffs are
That
really
one's not
nifty
even
as
on my
well as
radar. I don't even know that
right,
card. I'm
right,
gonna have
you're
to
right.
look it
I'm
up
like in a
after.
totally different world. But for me, that's what I spend a lot of time looking at too. Is like if the commons and uncommons are doing something new, that's a good sign for the future, right? If the commons, because that means that like the rares that come out theoretically, they're gonna do something even better than that. Like if an uncommon is just making a 1/1 when I gain life each turn, that's a pretty fine effect for a life gain deck.
Yeah,
What's going to happen when that's upshifted to rare? And I guess we saw it, right? Heliod puts a +1/+1 counter, which I was a little down on Heliod when he first came out. I was like, man, I wish it was just an Archangel of Thune.
yeah, I think
But
I was too a little bit. I'm like, oh, that seems a little bit underwhelming, and then you play it
yeah,
one time, you're like, oh, this is the
oh,
craziest thing ever. This
right.
card is
Oh
insane.
yeah, yeah, for sure. Like, yeah, it's 3 mana on something that can't be destroyed. Like, okay, I'm gonna get my value out of this. That's fine. It'll take me just a touch longer, but I'll have giant creatures either way.
Yeah, I remember a game where I filmed with it when it first came out where I had a bunch of Soul Sisters in play, and I think it was about turn 6, and like I was more or less ready to present like close to board lethal on turn 6 just from Soul Sisters, some life gain, and like this was no combo. It was just like my creatures are huge now. I think a board wipe happened and some things fell apart for me along the way, but like prior to Heliod, I don't think there were really many white decks that could present that kind of power that early into a game.
Right.
God Eternal Oketra may be the only other one.
Mhm.
And, I was just really impressed about the power level of Heliod, even if you're not doing the combo. The combo is obviously very good and very powerful. But yeah, Heliod was an absolutely insane card. What do you think, like, pick 5 white cards that you think were, like, the best white cards from the past year or so.
Oh, okay. So I guess Heliod's definitely in that criteria.
Yep.
I think I'm gonna give some credit to the Amiria Flipland. I think that's I really like Amiria's Call from its perspective of just like how easy it is to include in a deck.
Okay.
So I'll include that one. It's really hard because I haven't gotten to play because of quarantine. I haven't gotten to play with a lot of the 2020
Okay.
cards.
Do you want me to
So
give
like a
you a
lot of
couple?
it's
You want a couple of mine that I think you may agree with?
yeah, absolutely go
All
for
right.
it.
So we got Mangara, the white
Yeah,
card
yeah.
draw, right? We
hmm
got Keeper of the Accord, the white ramp. I don't know if you played with this one yet. I've been having a ton of success with the Chroma's Will. I think it's an incredibly powerful and underrated card right now,
hmm
and I think that's 5. Interesting. You're high on Amaria's Call. I'm not.
Right.
Um, and I've talked about this in some of my videos. Where like at the end of the day, Amaria's Call makes Sarah Angels, and I think I'm just getting tired of the White Mythic making Sarah Angels. Sarah Angels 28 years old, and it's not a new design. Like it's just hard for me to get excited about making more Sarah Angels. I don't think it's a bad card. I think that it's great for standard, and I think it's actually making a pretty big splash in standard. And I get
Yep.
that they do need to print standard cards, here and there. But I would have rather just seen that design go somewhere else, right? I wish they just did something else with it. Have I won a game with that card? Yes, I've won a game with that
hmm
card. I haven't played it a lot, so haven't had a ton of chances to do that. But there's some things I don't like about it because I don't think it doesn't. The angels don't protect themselves when you cast it, if
Right.
I remember right, and that seems like maybe they could just protect themselves, get something out of this 7 mana. And,
Mhm.
for commander, like 7 mana plays need to be very impactful. And when I play white and I'm thinking about my 7 drops, I'm thinking about Elish Norn, Chancellor of the Annex, Angelic Arbiter, Bruna, and like Angel of Serenity or something like that. Like those are kind of what I'm thinking about if I want 7 drops in my deck.
Mhm.
And Amaria's Call is like not as impactful as those cards. Obviously there's things you can do with, you can like, if you have the mana you could play a board wipe and save all your stuff and do that kind of thing. But
Yeah, and for me, it's like so one of my projects because I haven't gotten to play with a lot of 2020 cards. One of my projects this year is I'm building a deck just of cards that were printed in 2020. It's a mono white deck, and the floor on all of those flip cards, Ondu Inversion, Amiria's Call, Sajiri's Step, or it's Sajiri's Protection.
Sujiri
The
Glacier, I use that one a lot.
yeah,
That card is very good.
the floor on all of those cards being lands makes it so much easier to have something to do. And that's what I really like. Like Amiria's Call being a land early game so I don't get stuck with this 7 drop in my hand. And then late game not being a land so that I have something I can actually cast is just such a huge boon for white specifically because every card is so much more valuable because you have less card draw. So like you
Yeah.
got to make sure that you're making the most of every single card you're playing and putting in your deck. And if your card can pull double duty without being too high of an opportunity cost, that's like a huge boon. So I think that's why those cards really resonate with me. They made this 2020 deck that I'm playing with like they were all auto includes. I did in October. I did a 30 deck or 31 decks in 31 days for Moxtober,
It's a lot of
and
decks.
yeah, that's a lot of decks, and those almost all of those cards were just Ondu Inversion, Amira's Call were just auto includes because I just put them in the land slot, and they just gave the deck something to do, and they gave the deck some utility lands.
Yeah. So there's a couple things I want to touch on. The first thing is like, you are a primarily mono white player. I'm primarily a Boros player.
Right.
And access to red really adds a lot to white. Like a lot of my decks they are more heavily white than they are red, but having a
hmm
few powerful red cards to go alongside them really does a lot. And for me being in that space, to me, Amaria's Call like just isn't that impactful of a card. I haven't played a
Right.
ton of mono white since Amaria's Call has come out, and it's something that I want to get back to, especially after Kaldheim releases.
Well, it's
And
a huge opportunity cost too. And as soon as you get into 2 colors, like that's a huge opportunity cost to play that type of land.
yeah, and so one of the things is if you have a perfect mana base, which I do on Magic Online because you only ever need 1 copy of every card.
Right.
Once you have all the fetches, dual shocks, and everything else, then I'm actually struggling to keep enough basics in my deck. Like I'm at a
Hmm.
point where I don't want to cut any more
Exactly.
basics, and like Amaria's Call doesn't make the cut for me in that sense.
Exactly.
Now, if I'm playing in paper and like I'm working on a Munda deck right now, which is I think my sixth Boros deck, so that's going to be like a deck full of mostly basics. Amaria's Call would be a card that would work for that deck because there's going to be like probably 20 basic lands in the deck. So
And you get that Zendikar flavor win.
yeah. There's a few other things that you said that I wanted to touch on too. Oh god, they're gone now.
By thoughts.
Yep, yep, there they go.
What about here's a card that I haven't gotten to play with, but is just fascinating to me. New design space, something that Mono White loves, Luminous Broodmoth. I haven't gotten a single chance to try that card in a game yet.
Yeah,
But
that's
it is just it screams everything I love about white, like recursion, incremental value, not completely broken, but potential to be broken as you add more cards with it. Um, but I haven't gotten to cast it in a game yet, so I have no idea how good it is in Commander.
yeah, and so when you look at the list of like good white cards that came out in the past year, that is definitely on the list of like this is a high quality card.
Hmm.
I haven't played it a ton myself. Some of my Patreons have played it in some of the games that I played with them. And it's definitely good, but it's not as good as you expect. It needs
Right.
to be in the right setting. It's not an everywhere all the time type of card. It
Yeah.
definitely wants to be in the right kind of deck. If you're doing like a sacrifice theme, then there's definitely some room to explore with the Broodmoth. I think outside of that, as just like basic board wipe protection, it's fine, but you have better options. You know, like the big
Yeah.
one, if you have a Teferi's Protection is just the most insane magic card. If you don't, then something like Eerie Interlude is still much more protective than Luminous Broodmoth. And now we've got two new protection spells coming in Kaldheim with Glorious Protector and what's the other one? Is it Cosmic Intervention? Those are going to be really good protection spells, especially Glorious Protector, because, you know, the two things that I'm always worried about are Toxic Deluge and Cyclonic Rift. Those are the hardest
Right.
things to protect against with a white deck. And you know, most of the other protection spells get you around like Wrath of God, Blasphemous Act, Indestructible takes care of all that. It's the Deluge and the Rift that Indestructible does not help you with. So Luminous Broodmoth, it's good from what I've seen, but it's still you need the right deck for it. It doesn't just go everywhere, but you know, if you're a newer player and you have a Luminous Broodmoth, I think your deck is better having it than not having it. So, you know, if you have better board wipe protection available, I'd steer you in that direction. But, you know, if it's the only thing you have, board wipe protection is still better than no board wipe protection. So
Well, and I think it's an interesting card because it lends itself to like here's a future design space that we can go into, right?
it allows
Like
white to
it's
value a
showing
little bit,
creativity.
which white has not historically been able to value particularly well.
Yeah.
So I do think that makes it very exciting as well. You know, and that might be a point is like maybe it makes sense to get them now. I don't know what the price is. I assume they aren't very expensive because it hasn't seen tons of play as far as I'm aware. At least in EDH, I don't know what standard's doing, but
I,
um,
I know it's more than $1, but
okay,
it can't be much more than that.
okay. Is it less than $5?
Most certainly, there's no way it's more than $5.
Yeah, so like if it's a mythic and you know it's less than $5 and there's like future potential, probably worth picking up. At least have a couple
Right.
copies anyway. Um,
Especially if you have like an Anafenza deck. I have an Anafenza deck on MTGO that's a very aristocrat style combo deck. Oh wow, it's more expensive than that. It's like almost $10.
oh my god, is it really?
Jeez.
Okay, never mind. Forget everything I just
Uh,
said.
that's a punch to the gut.
Ouch. Yeah, so like
But
you know, being that there's like future potential with that card, definitely like keep it on your radar. Because if like a really good mono white aristocrat piece shows up, then I think that's definitely going to help a lot. But the thing that that card says to me, it was a signal that like, okay, we are actually trying to make white cards better.
mhm,
Even though I don't think it's quite as good as I would have hoped, it still signals to me that they were at least like taking a step in the direction.
mhm. And the big thing for me is just creativity. We've seen, and I'm sure that you'll have a lot to say at the end of this about creativity. You've already touched on it a bit, but that's a creative card.
It
That's a
is.
creative card that feels uniquely white and still plays into that feeling because that's a big thing for me is I love the feeling of playing a white deck where it's a slow like white decks tend to be very linear in their growth. Like you see me building up and at some point that's just going to be too much for you to overcome and I'm going to overwhelm you. It's gonna be a bit. You're gonna see it coming the whole time, but at some point I'm gonna get there.
Yeah, and that's actually one of White's biggest weaknesses is that
Right.
because you see it coming, board wipe, everything goes away. I mentioned it in the before we got going. I'll talk about it. This is the thing that I've been thinking about a lot is problem solving white cards. In my mind, there are three problem areas for white cards. That's card draw, ramp, and then proactive ways to win the game, especially ones that your opponents can't answer at sorcery speed. So the biggest problem is that if you cast Entreat the Angels for
Yeah.
X a million and make a million
Starnheim.
angels, Starnheim Unleashed, the new one, right? I was getting them,
Mhm.
I was mixing them up in my brain because they're the same card. Uh, thanks, Watson.
One's slightly cheaper, right?
Yeah,
Kind of.
slightly, yeah. The mana cost is different. It does the same thing, right?
At least it's an example of power creep, I guess.
I guess. So anyway, I've been thinking about this thing of like problem solving white cards. White needs to ramp better, it needs to draw better, it needs to be able to proactively win the game that your opponents can't answer at sorcery speed. With all those things is that you can have this massive board state, but your opponents always see it coming. It's very telegraphed, and it just gives them a lot of opportunity to interact with it. And you can have an awesome board state, and then it just falls apart because your opponent's just like board wipe, everything goes away, and you're like, oh. Where with red, you get haste, green, you get haste. Black is probably just going to play like, at the higher power levels, you're going to get your Torment of Hailfires, your Gary, and that's all stuff that you have to interact with on the stack. Like once
Right.
it resolves, it generally kills you. So, one of White's biggest problems is this ability that like it needs to win on its turn before you can really see what's going on. One of my Patreons, he's been testing he tested a bunch of mono white decks over the past couple weeks. He had some time and he played a lot of games with Heliod, Mangara, and God Eternal Oketra, which for me, I think those are all going to be three top quality mono white commanders. He said that
Definitely.
the card draw on Mangara was just consistently better than everything else that the other commanders were doing. He wasn't doing like the full combo with Heliod, but
Right.
he said the card draw was just so powerful. But he did say that the problem with God Eternal Oketra was that everything was very telegraphed. They could always see what's coming. You cast a couple creatures, get a couple 4/4s, and they just see it, and then they play a board wipe, and then it goes away, and then you're left with nothing. And that's one of White's biggest problems is you need this ability to end the game quickly where your opponents don't have a million interaction points that they can stop you. And I think some of that comes back to that creativity that you mentioned where they've kind of been printing the same white cards for a long time. Did you see the
They
tweet?
figured out the.
What's that? Yeah, they definitely do have a formula. Did you see the tweet comparing Kaldheim to Avacyn Restored?
I did. Yes, I did.
Yeah, that
Um,
resonated with me, and that tweet actually soured my opinion of Kaldheim a little bit. I'm like,
mhm.
oh, they really do just print the same white cards over and over again, right? Like, if I didn't believe it, now I kind of believe it in my heart because, these three cards line up almost exactly. And sure, they're stronger than their predecessors, but like, they're
They
not
aren't unique.
yeah, they're not unique.
Yeah.
And that was one of my main gripes with Starnheim Unleashed is this is a card that they've given us in like 6 or 7 previous iterations. I don't need the 8th copy of this card.
Mhm. Right, and if it just had the issue, because I'm someone who's all about getting new iterations, because white has a real big problem too, where its best effects are 100% unique and you have one copy and that copy costs you like $30.
Exactly. Or it's Sun
But
Titan. Like there's one Sun Titan. There's not a great way to search for that Sun Titan.
yeah.
And you know what I mean? It's just like the games I have with Sun Titan are very different than the games I have without Sun Titan.
hmm And so I love the fact that sure we have 7 different things that make 4/4 angels, but there needs to be an element of creativity added besides just cost reduction, because then you're not wanting to play two of those, you're wanting to swap the bad one out for the now better one,
Exactly.
and that's the issue. If you have two unique 4/4 angel creators and one of them is like a miracle card and the other one taps all your opponent's creatures too, or I don't know, something, at least then it's like, okay, they're playing in the same space, but they're also playing around in different spaces too. These are just the same exact space. How
Yeah.
many 4/4 angel producers can you actually play?
Right.
Where like at least Sun Titan this year, we've seen Idol of Endurance, Trove Warden. Now, I'm not going to compare those. Those cards don't match the level of value that you get out of a Sun Titan,
No, no,
but
they
at least
don't.
they're unique iterations that I can see a deck where I want to play a Trove Warden alongside my Sun Titan, or even in place of like a terrain generator list where I'm triggering landfall a lot. That Trove Warden can almost be better than a Sun Titan, to some extent.
Right. In
I
the
mean,
right list, if you're doing
right.
like the Burnished Heart, Ameria Shepherd kind of thing, that Trove Warden might start looking pretty good.
Mhm. But
Um,
Starnheim and Treat the Angels, I mean, there's really not a whole lot of ways to change the play pattern of those two cards.
you want the biggest change? The single biggest change, and this is like, it's an easy change that changes the power level dramatically. If Starnheim Unleashed is an instant, it's one of the best white cards ever printed.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. For
Because
sure.
then you play it at the end step, and now you've got a million angels that you can attack with right away. They can't
Mhm.
answer you at sorcery speed, so you are probably taking out one or more players. Um,
Right.
and that's been the biggest problem is that I did a whole video on it, and I realized that like the sorcery card type is awful for white. Like obviously white does have good sorceries, usually in the form of board wipes, but white has almost no way to interact with sorceries as a card type. You can't get them back,
Mhm.
you can't double cast them, there's no reverberate. Like once you play it, it's just in your graveyard, and you probably can't do anything else with it. Where at least if it's an instant, it gives you that power spike. So
Right.
the one time you play it, it's really going to matter. But the other way to look at it too is that if you find a way to take that same effect and put it on a creature body is so much more useful to white than
Mhm.
being on a sorcery, because you can get it back, you can blink it, you can do other stuff to like take more advantage of this card. And that's another one of the issues that I have is again, it falls into this trap of it's the same thing we've seen before. Sorceries are kind of a bad card type for white, right? Like an
Right.
instant is infinitely more powerful, and if it were an instant, that would give it the power spike it needed, or if it was a creature, that would give it the just the ability to take more advantage of what the card gives you. And again, I think it's that lack of creativity. It's that like this is the same card we've seen, and that's what makes it so painful. Let me compare that to some cards in other colors for you. I made a little list here of just like some of the top cards from the past year or so of other colors, and we can talk about like whether these cards are unique to the color. We can talk about their power and this and that, and kind of compare it to some of the white things we've seen. So I think my favorite making this list was the red cards. The red cards were insane over the past year. Here, I'll read you through a couple. Red got the most. I'll do red last. Black had like 5 or 6 things that looked interesting. I think it got the least help actually, but it got Opposition Agent, Feed the Swarm, Drana, Agadeem's Awakening. Oh, that's a point I want to touch on, by the way. I'll get back to that one.
Mhm.
Tevish Sat, Species Specialist, and Sat's Will. Blue got Hullbreacher, Thieving Skydiver, Sakashima, Malcolm, Thassa Deep Dwelling, Confounding Conundrum, and Thassa's Oracle. Green. Oh, green. Green got Nyx Bloom Ancient, Kodama, Elder Gargaroth, Ancient Green Warden, Ashaya, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Barrier Breach, and Balaged Recovery. Red, oh, this is my favorite one. Red's got Underworld Breach, Morag, Jeska's Will, Jeska, Tectonic Giant, Molten Echoes, Brash Taunter, Double Vision, Embercleave, Fiery Emancipation, Leyline Tyrant, Perforos, Terror of the Peaks, Torbrand, and Deflecting Swat. The list of red cards is insane. Like, red got just so many crazy things. And then, just for completion's sake, here's some of the white cards that I thought were some of the top white cards. We talked about 5 of them already. I think some of the best ones: Mangara, Keeper, Chroma's Will, Dranith Magistrate, Heliod's Intervention, Heliod, Angel of Destiny, Deafening Silence, Realm Cloak Giant, Luminous Broodmoth, Skyclave Apparition are some of the tops for me, and there were a couple good reprints, and I think Archon of Emeria is a pretty solid hate bear also. But
Those
like,
white cards though do not strike. I don't think any of them strike fear in anybody, which I don't know if it's a bad thing or a good thing. Like I definitely am someone who doesn't play a lot of like the bomby top end spells,
yeah,
but like not all the cards you listed for the other colors were bomby top end spells, but they definitely were scary.
yeah. All right, so like, take any white card I just said, compare it to Fiery Emancipation
Right.
or Embercleave. You're just like, oh god, I'm gonna die really soon if that stays
Well,
on the battlefield.
and it just goes back to those white cards. either are essentially the same effect that we're already getting with no new play pattern, or just an effect that's like we don't really need, right?
Yeah.
Like the most unique is probably Angel of Destiny, which is a
Yep.
really cool card. It plays well into life gain, but it's a completely different access for life gain to play on.
Yes.
Versus Heliod, which is just Archangel of Thune, but now in retrospect probably better.
Yes.
And then I compare that to the blue that stood out to me, like Thassa's Oracle
Tier
is a
1
lab,
CEDH deck. The single best combo in all of Commander right now. Thassa's
but it's
Oracle.
also it's also a lab man that plays differently than lab man.
Yep.
And that's really meaningful. The play patterns between Labman and Thassa's Oracle are totally different.
Yep.
I mean, essentially it's the same result. I'm going to draw my entire library out, but Thassa's Oracle has to come afterwards, and Labman has to come before, and that changes how you're going to operate. That changes how you actually play the game, and you don't even sometimes you want them in the same deck, and sometimes you don't want them in the same deck. So I don't know. I think Thassa's Oracle is a good example of that. Here's an iteration on a card. You get a second copy, but it doesn't play the same way as that first copy.
Yeah, and I'm going to go out on a limb, and I might be overstepping here. I dabble in CDH. I'm not a CDH expert. If they banned Thassa's Oracle and people had to switch back to Labman and Jace, I'm not sure that that's still a tier 1 strategy, or at the very least, it's at least much less consistent because there are
Hmm.
many more interaction points with dealing with Labman and dealing with the Jace. And there's a lot more time. They need an extra card involved or an extra draw to make everything
Right.
happen. And it's just not as clean and easy as casting Thassa's Oracle.
Hmm.
Looking at some of the other blue stuff, I thought the blue ones were interesting too because blue got things that make mana in blue: Hull Breacher, Thieving Skydiver if you're stealing a rock,
Right.
Malcolm, Facet Deep Dwelling if you're bouncing a Solemn Simulacrum. Like, right, those are
Hmm.
three really impactful cards that all make you a bunch of mana. You've got Confounding Conundrum to stop your opponent's mana, and like to me that kind of speaks a lot that like blue kind of got some really good stuff because if you looked at like Izzet decks, Esper decks, Demir, they were a little bit stuck on like their abilities to produce a lot of mana beside just casting a lot of artifacts.
Hmm.
Right. So if I'm the white player at the table, I'm playing Austere Command, I might be bringing an Hour of Revelation. I can get rid of a lot of their mana with one of those board wipes. Where before they'd have to kind of rely on like they can rely on like Turnabout and High Tide, depending on what they're
Hmm.
doing. But now it's like, all right, blue can make a lot of mana with those cards, and white got I think just Keeper. I think Keeper is the only one that really makes mana in a meaningful way.
Right. I'm not thinking of any new cards I have in any decks that make a significant amount of mana. We got that plow coming in Kaldheim,
Oh
which
god, the plow.
hey, at least I'll say at least about the plow, it's another piece of creativity. It synergizes with white wants to play a lot of creatures, so like I'm open to it. I don't think it's gonna be revolutionary or anything, but
The crew 6 is really high. I've
really
played
restrictive.
yeah, I've played what's that card? It's the pirate ship one. Oh god. It's the one that
Fell
flips over.
flagship.
It's the one that
Uh,
flips over. It's in
right.
yeah,
Conqueror's Galleon.
Conqueror's Galleon, that's the one. I think that's a crew 4 if I'm remembering
Right.
right.
And it's hard.
And that crew 4 is a lot.
Yep.
And crew 6 means I'm tapping my Sun Titan to make a dark ritual essentially. And
Hmm.
yeah, I don't know, just tapping a Sun Titan to get 3 extra mana doesn't seem worth it to me. Maybe in some decks, maybe in like a token deck, if you have a bunch of 2/2s running around, that might be worth 3/2/2s, but
The
with
rough part too is it's 3 mana post combat, which post
yeah,
combat when you've basically given away your combat step is not ideal.
no. No. Yeah, and like to me it's frustrating because it could have been good and like they just did everything in a way that like, well, this could have been good, now it's not.
To get back to like the comparing it to other colors too, like comparing white across other colors, what do you think? Do you think white improved more than the other colors did? Because like so blue, green, black, red, they got good cards, but because if those colors are already going 70, you can only go so much faster, right? So, do you think the other colors, like each improvement that the other colors gets,
Yeah.
technically relative means less than an improvement that white gets because white is going slower.
Yeah, I've been thinking about that exact thing, right?
Hmm.
Because there are more problems with white. Any impactful card you make is you're going to notice it a lot more because the
Right.
cards before that have been like quote unquote bad.
Hmm.
And so if all the other decks are doing 70 and white's doing 45, if white accelerates 30 miles per hour, they're still doing 70 or yeah, no. This failure in math is brought to you by MothershipATX.com, where you can save 15% on your order of singles by using the promo code REPLAY. Link is in the description below. That's MothershipATX.com, where math is for blockers. That makes some sense. So let's assume they increase 20 miles per hour. So they'll go to 65. They're still going slower than the other colors, but like that gap that they're closing they closed a much bigger gap.
Right.
When I looked at the number of black cards, there actually weren't that many like black cards that were like super impactful that I see a lot of. And it's because black has kind of had all the things it's needed for like years and years. I remember my very first Shieldred deck. It had creature removal, it had card draw, it had mana ramp, it had reanimation, it had tutors. Like, what else does it need? You know what I mean? It's just like it kind of gets better versions of all those things, but nothing that like really, really shakes up the play pattern of the deck. Where, you compare it to white, white's got it's got these big holes in its game plan where it doesn't make the mana, it doesn't draw the cards, it doesn't have the proactive win. So as you start getting those things, like that, you feel them much, much more. They are much more impactful. But let's compare it to green. Green is the one. If you catch me on a bad day on Twitter, I will complain about green all day. So I'm gonna try to keep it like constructive for what we're doing here. But look at the top like 3 green cards for me: Nyx Bloom Ancient, Kodama, Elder Gargaroth.
All of them see play.
Not only do they see play,
Like,
they're also insane. They take over the
yeah,
game when they happen,
yeah.
right?
They all see play. They're almost auto includes, and yeah, they completely control the game. Like green sped up, green sped up
Yeah.
for sure.
And the thing is that like green's in a different space because like green also has most of the tools it needs. The only thing it's
Mhm.
like been a little bit soft on is like good removal. Now you're looking at like, I feel like every set they release a green card that basically goes infinite or semi-infinite with every other green card that exists. The new Kodama with any of the cast a creature, draw a spell cards, like it's not infinite, but it's gonna get you really far ahead. You cast a
Right.
creature, draw a card, get a thing. Eventually, you run into like a second one of those draw type effects, and now you're drawing 2, and the game just spirals very quickly. And it all starts. It can start very early into the game. Elder Gargaroth is literal every ability on a card. Um, Going back a little bit further, the Great Henge, also every ability on a card. The
Yeah.
Great Henge draws you cards, gains you life, makes mana, and puts +1/+1 counters on things.
Yep.
What other design space is left?
It doesn't remove a creature at least.
It is not removal. That's the one thing
Right.
that it doesn't do.
Yeah. Take that.
Oh, yeah. So it's just like green's on a different level where like every piece green gets is kind of just like it's a new combo, and it's just like it's increasing its consistency. One of the things I always fear is that like as a white player, I've got swords, path, and a couple board wipes. The more must kill green creatures they release, I can't run 45 removal spells in my deck.
Right.
Or if I did, it would be a really bad like it's not what I want to play, and it'd be a really bad time for everyone else at the table.
I've
uh
played that deck. It is not fun
yeah,
for other people. I love control stuff, but everyone else is miserable.
I don't mind a little control, but like my thing is if I'm going to control the game, I also want a way to end it once I have control of the game. Like I don't want to drag it out for 15 or 20 turns.
Outside of your 2/4 lifelink in the command zone.
Yeah. So like every new green card is just it's part of like some combo of cards that already like more or less make you infinite mana or too much mana, and you cast like half your deck in a few turns, and just it's on another level. But then like looking at the red cards, we've been using this metaphor of everyone else is doing 70 with everything red got. I feel like red is actually doing like probably like 90. Like they got
Hmm.
some really good stuff this year.
And
Deflecting
maybe,
swat.
yeah, yeah, and maybe that's like the growth pattern we need to expect, right? Because they really, what was it? Maybe 2, 3 years ago, they really started working on red,
I
and
think it
it
was
was
actually longer than that. I think it was probably about 5. I think it started a little bit slow, and then they kind of really ramped it in the past 2 or 3 years. because if you go back to one of the Tarkir blocks, there's a card called Commune with Lava, and that's a card that I use, and it's really good with Sword of Feast and Famine.
Right.
That was some very good red card draw at that moment. Now there's other pieces they've printed that are obviously very good that you don't necessarily need to use Commune with Lava, but it's still very useful in the right decks. So I think they kind of had the seeds of starting some red cards probably like 5-ish years ago.
Right.
You look at like Neheb, which is I think about 2016, 2017, somewhere around there.
You could probably initiate it with Act on Impulse. Act on Impulse being the first like red card.
Yeah.
It's pay 3, exile the top 3, like impulsive draw begins there. That's M15.
Yep.
Like that's when they started. And Act on Impulse, I'm sure people were excited for it. I wish I could go back in a time machine and see how people reacted.
Yeah.
But
Based on the
that's the
fact that
start.
like I never saw that card that much, I don't know. Right? Like I don't know if it had the hype. I think it kind of to me, I think it just flew under the radar because like that was a card that I rarely see, over the past 5 years playing games.
Right.
And
it's a completely outclassed now.
sure.
They've embraced that, but that's when they embraced that. Like they realize, okay, this is a neat design space. They embrace it, and now we're getting to that point where, they really have a good hold of red design because all those red cards you mentioned, like they feel super red.
They feel red and they feel awesome when you play them.
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
you're like, I play this card. This is great. I love this.
So like maybe and green started even further back with like I think Ari said like Mirrodins when they started to realize like okay, green has a problem. Like
Yep.
green isn't good, and so now we see where that eventually leads.
Yep.
So maybe that's like a little hope for the future. Like we are seeing we've been able to highlight designs that are creative, they're interesting, they build excitement. We may not play them in every deck yet, but like these are cool designs. Like
Yep.
these are designs that I can look at and say, hey, I like that card. Like this is a good reason to play white. So maybe that's just a little hope for the future that give it, I don't know, M15 came out in 2015, so give it 5 years and we'll see whatever the comparable white card is to all these cool red cards that came out.
Yeah. And you know what I've been wanting? I've been thinking about this a lot is there needs to be a white card that says this feels awesome when you play a creature. Right now in red, red and green has most of those cards. So in red, you've got Molten Echo is one of the newer ones, Sunbird's Invocation, Mirror March. Older one is like Flame Shadow Conjuring. I think it kind of gets outclassed by some of the newer ones. But when you have those cards in play, casting a creature feels awesome. With green, you have like all the card draw stuff, Zendikar Resurgent, but you've also got like Lurking Predators, and a card that I've been messing around with recently is Wild Pair. And the theme of all these cards is you play a creature, it feels awesome because more things happen. Right. And there isn't really a white card right like that. The best one I can think of is like Cathar's Crusade. And sure, Cathar's Crusade is good. It puts a +1/+1 counter, but it's not as exciting as like getting a second creature with Wild Pair or making token copies with Mirror March or casting a second spell with Sunbird's Invocation. I think that's an area that's really missing is like, I want a card that makes playing the other things I'm already doing feel awesome.
And those are do nothing enchantments. So they're safe cards to print usually in other formats. Like, and Commander players love them. Commander players love, this is a do nothing enchantment, but on my next turn, I'm going to do something. And you're all going to be quaking in your boots.
Yeah, exactly. Like you tap out for 6 and then you like hold your breath, that thing it survives back to your turn. And then if it does, things get wild. Yeah, like white doesn't have that type of card. I would say that like because white's been hard for tools, that like they should really aggressively cost it, maybe make it like 4 mana instead of 6, which most of the ones I named are. And that's like one of the things that's really missing. Kind of looking back toward the list of white cards. So Mangara and Keeper, I think, were probably like the two biggest problem-solving cards in the sense one's draw and one is ramp, and they're both very good at their respective roles, assuming they don't immediately get shot, which is a problem that I've had. Then you look at some of the other stuff that came out. Akroma's Will, also very powerful in that it's protection, but it can also be a finisher, and I've had a lot of success with it as a finisher. But as you start getting into these other things, so Drannith Magistrate, Hate Bear, Archon of Emeria, Hate Bear, Hushbringer came out a little bit older, but Hate Bear. Good Hate Bears, but still Hate Bears.
Yep.
And as much as I love a hate bear, they aren't proactive win conditions. Every color kind of has its like really nasty side where it's like, oh, I don't want to face that.
Right.
For white, it's hate bears. Black, it's going to be discard. Blue is counter spells. Green is I win the game on turn 4. Uh, and red's kind of weird, but red would be just like mass burn, like I burn you out in 4 or
Yeah.
5 turns,
I
and
was
I
about
like
to say like Hitsugu
Perforos. Yeah, just
or yeah,
Perforos,
Perforos is
Heartless
another example.
Hitasugu, just like you're dead. I didn't really interact with you at all in this game. It was kind of just literal red deck wins commander style.
Right.
I love red deck wins personally, but if you're looking for an
I
interactive game, it's not necessarily that.
I think in standard I'm actually secretly a red deck wins player. I had that realization the other day, and
Oh yeah.
it made my skin crawl. I was like, oh no, like this is actually the type of deck I like to play in standard.
So I've played many of the iterations of red deck wins over the years. I haven't played as much standard recently since I've been like full-time commander stuff, but
Hmm.
years past, going back 10 years, I think between let's say like 2008 and probably 2013 or 14, I played like most of the versions of red deck wins. And when I started playing commander, my goal was to try to bring red deck wins to commander. It's easier to do now, but oh man,
Right.
going back 8 years, super hard. uh
Yeah, I can't even imagine what you were
yeah,
using. Like
so like
Dictate of the Twin Gods to try and I don't even know. That
it
would be tricky.
it was hard. It was very hard. The thing back then too is like I was playing a lot of Magic Online, so like Magic Online just lends itself to spikiness. A lot of people just play like CEDH or near CEDH level decks, and you cannot aggro faster than they can combo, especially eight
Yep.
years ago. Now it's possible, and my understanding of the format has changed where like it's possible if you drop a hate bear, if you drop the one hate bear that makes their deck not work, then yes, you can aggro faster than they can combo. But I've also kind of shifted my mindset of like, all right, I figured out how fast I can actually aggro people out of the game in like, 5, 6 turns
Hmm.
with a good deck and a strong commander, but like that's not necessarily fun for everyone else,
Yeah.
right? That's like you need to be in the right setting where they need to be playing that like spiky combo deck and you're playing the spiky aggro deck basically. So I was always trying to bring that red deck wins flavor into commander, and now I've kind of reached that point of like, all right, I figured out about as fast as you can go with an aggro deck. I've actually like reined it back some. Like, okay, maybe that's not actually that fun,
Hmm.
but yeah, but looking toward the future, I do hope that the white cards get better. Like you talked about, kind of that 5-year plan of it took green a few years and then green got all the stuff. It took red a few years and then red got all the stuff. I hope that's on the horizon for white,
Hmm.
but there's still some things that worry me, and I'm going to talk about some of the cards that I think missed.
Yeah, go
So,
for it.
I put Amaria's Call on that list. I know you like it. I don't
Ouch.
personally care for it. Like, I still think that card just could have been something better. And actually, there was a point I wanted to touch on. So before I move on, I'll compare that to Agadeem's Awakening.
Oh yeah, yeah.
You know what I mean? Or like Balaged Recovery. I'm not sure if Balaged. I don't think Balaged's the mythic for that slot. I think it's a lower rarity.
It's Turn Timber something.
Turn Timber is
It
the
like
mythic one.
it's like a really bad version of like 30 green effects, but you
Yeah.
don't notice because green also got like four other cards that are really cool versions of
Yep.
other green effects.
Exactly. And, part of that's a mindset thing that I've noticed too is that, like, making this list, I've got it up in front of me, is just like, there were actually a lot of good white cards,
Yep.
but they're not always as impactful as you want them to be. And because we're coming from this mindset of white doesn't have the things it needs, there is a lot of focus on the negative aspect of when they miss with a card. So here's some other things that I think kind of missed from the past year and a half. Elspeth Conquers Death, Elspeth Sun's Nemesis, Happily Ever After, Seraphic Greatsword, Triumphant Reckoning, and Cartographer's Hawk.
The Conqueror's Death is surprising to me. I love that card.
I think it's not bad. The problem is it's just overcosted. If that thing was 4 mana, I'd be all about it. At
Hmm.
5 mana for where I play, it's a little bit slow.
Yeah. And that's just the brutal part about getting a cool card in a standard deck is because that
Yep.
card crushed standard for a while.
Yeah.
So if they would have made it 4, it would have been horrible for standard. Um, but yeah, I can definitely see 5 mana is a lot of mana.
Yeah, and like if that, because there's a restriction on the removal. If it was like any permanent for 5 mana, I could probably justify it,
Hmm.
at least somewhere. And again, I tend to play like multicolor white. I play a lot of Boros because I already have a lot of good removal. I
Right.
just don't find myself needing it. Again, if I switch back to like mono white more, it may become more valuable there.
Right.
Just because,
And once again, that's just that it's doing double duty. It's recursion and it's removal and a little text to slow your opponents down too.
yep. How do you feel about Elspeth's Son's Nemesis?
So I like that card, but I'm with you. Like, so I like Elspeth's Son Nemesis. It's the type of card I like to play. It's a grindy card.
Yep.
It's a card you can recast. It is pseudo card advantage, but how often have I played it? None.
Yeah, and you know
Zero
what the
times
problem
have I
is?
played it.
The problem is that it makes 1/1s, right? Like if it made 2/2s or something like that, like something more impactful than a 1/1. I was talking about this with someone, I can't even remember who now, but we were talking about like because they really tried to push that card as like I think one of the face cards of that set, and it's like, yeah, it does all this awesome stuff, but you better watch out for my 1/1s.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? That's like it's kind of a hard sell right there. Like if it's spitting out creatures that are at least, you know what, have it spit out 4/4 angels because that's what every other card from the
I
last.
wonder if it could have had a plus, like a
Yeah.
plus or a plus or a zero that was a little bit better. It's the fact that you minus it the entire time. So like you minus two, you get 2/1/1s, and you get one more activation of that, and that's it. And
Yep.
that's where it becomes a struggle. So it's that classic white card where if you pair it with something else, it gets so much better. If you pair it with Divine Visitation or Mentor of the Meek or a future Mentor of the Meek that's even better than Mentor of the Meek,
Yeah, that's the card that I'm hoping
then
on, and I'm hoping
then
it's
then it gets really
legendary.
then it gets really good. I Mentor of the Meek. I actually got to play a game with it in an Esper deck, and I drew like 20 cards off of it,
Oh wow,
which
that's
was
awesome.
amazing. Um, but man, was it clunky. Like I didn't win that game because I had to spend mana to draw the cards.
Yeah, exactly.
Um,
Like,
yeah.
even at 1 mana, it's a little bit too expensive to be super
hmm
effective. And
You're taxing yourself,
yep,
right?
yep.
Like a Ristic Study, I pay the one for Ristic Study every time, and it's brutal. And Mentor of the Meek, I'm taxing myself. I get to draw a card off of it, but like taxing yourself makes your hands a lot clunkier, which is
Right.
fine by me. I love slow, clunky hands, but
Oh, I can tell you
it's
stories
obviously
about
a
slow,
cost.
clunky hands. So before I do, one of the things I've always thought about Mentor of the Meek is that if it were legendary, you could plan for it and it would actually be a really good card. But white is also the color that is able to produce the least amount of mana. So in a green deck, Mentor of the Meek is probably insane because every
Right.
time you cast an Avenger of Zendikar or something like that, like you have the mana to pay the extra 5 or 6 and draw 5 or 6 more cards. In a white deck, you don't generate mana that way to be able to pay for that every time. And there's also a timing problem there, which is you need to have the mana when the thing enters the battlefield, which is
hmm
different than something
Right.
like I've been using Tome of Legends a lot in my Aurelia deck because, Aurelia. And Tome
hmm
of Legends, I pick when I want to spend that mana. Like, if I
Right.
do it when, like, okay, I can leave up 3 mana for Teferi's Protection, but if I don't need it, then I just draw at the end step and life is good. The fact that it has to all be timed perfectly with Mentor of the Meek also holds it back just a little bit as
hmm
well. I forget who I was talking about. We were talking about white card something, and they were saying it was some other expensive white effect. I don't remember what it is now, but white doesn't make mana the same way that other colors can. Like all those blue cards I named to you, those are all like ways that blue can now generate a lot more mana. Red's getting a lot of ways to generate mana. Neheb a few years ago, Alina, Goldspan Dragon is basically spits out dark rituals via tokens. Black Black has the most mana doublers and it has Cabal Coffers. If you've ever played, if you've never played a mono black deck that has Cabal Coffers, once you have Cabal Coffers is your commander. The rest of your deck doesn't
Right.
matter. The only thing that matters is that you're making, 10 more mana than your opponents every turn.
God, I played Cabal Stronghold, and that card basically becomes my commander,
Yeah,
and it's
exactly.
so much worse. It's so much worse than Cabal Coffers.
Yeah, and you know what I mean. Like in a perfect deck, if you have no budget restrictions, you're gonna have Urborg, Cabal Coffers, Cabal Stronghold, and what's it called, Deserted Temple to untap them. And
hmm
you know what I mean. That becomes your game plan. Like your commander
Right.
doesn't even matter anymore. It's a thing you cast, but it's more about just like casting way more things than your opponents at that point. Kind of bringing it back to what I was talking about, some of these white cards that missed. Happily Ever After was kind of one of those ones that was marketed as quote unquote good white card, but it needs to be in a 5 color deck, and that was
Oh yeah.
kind of a slap in the face.
I
Um,
do have a mono white list that the it's one of the alternate win cons.
oh
Um,
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. It's tricky to pull off. The whole deck is just all win cons.
Oh,
So you
nice. Yeah.
could play it in your mono white deck and win the game if you wanted to, but you're making a lot of concessions.
Yeah, yeah.
And
It's
I've
not
never
going to
put
be
that card
easy.
in a mono white deck.
Right. And,
Yeah.
to me, it's frustrating. I wish they just made it more colors in the casting cost just because it changes the perception of the card, right? It doesn't make the
Right.
card wholesomely different, but it changes the way that we perceive the card, and it changes the way that they probably would have marketed that set, because they probably wouldn't have said powerful white cards if it's a 2 or 3 color card.
I wonder if that because it's really strange. White is the 5 color color.
Yep.
It's not green, but green's better for it. But white is where all the payoffs are, right? Sisay, happily ever after. There's more as you go back in time. White's the 5 color color. I wonder if that takes away from some of what mono white can do because it's the 5 color color.
Yeah, I mean, happily ever after is a rare slot that,
Exactly.
you know what I mean, mono white can't use it, so, that kind of sucks.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that I've been like kind of fixated on too, especially on the bad days for white, is when they miss.
Yeah.
Commander Legends, we got Seraphic Greatsword and Triumphant Reckoning, and for me, both of those cards miss. I know that Triumphant Reckoning is playable and you'll use it somewhere, but the fact is, right now it's like a $2 card. If they put the word creature on there, it's a $20 card and goes in every white deck.
I wonder if they just print anything other than Seraphic Greatsword if it's not as upsetting to people.
Yeah, it just give me like some overcosted angel, right? Like with some kind of relatively unique ability on it. And maybe we're a
like,
little
well,
disappointed if it's not
but
like
they're playable.
Yeah, it's playable somewhere. Like I can put it in my angel deck. The problem is that the greatsword is like literally playable nowhere.
I even tried to take that challenge on, and I was just like, why am I jumping through hoops
Yeah.
to play this card? Like, I can play this in my Evra deck if I want to, which
Mhm.
swaps my life total, so I have a lower life total. But why am I doing that?
Yeah, exactly. Like the payoff for that card is not winning the game, right?
Right.
For similar mana cost, you get Blade of Selves, and Blade of Selves is a very sweet magic card. Blade of Selves, turns out, I did this one time this year, pairs really well with a very good white card from this past year, which is Skyclave Apparition.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah, that's removal on a stick. Also, that was in an Aurelia deck, so I'm attacking twice with that. I won that game.
Yeah, I believe
it. That's about how that went. Yeah. So, I'll talk about Skyclave for a minute. So, Skyclave is like where has this card been for the past 5 years? It's awesome. I think people are still undervaluing it. I've seen some people naysay it a little bit on the Twitters. And, Kristen and I have like championed this thing pretty hard. Like, oh, yeah, no, this card is serious. This is like the white creature we've all been wanting for a very long time. And, you think about it, green's got its Rex Sage, red's got a decent number of ETBs. You got like Flame Tongue Kavu, you got the one that blows up lands. There's a few other ones floating around. But black has like a plethora of I cast this creature and it destroys your creature when it ETBs. You got Shriekmaw, Necrotal, the Chupacabra, and I'm sure I'm missing a few. And like white is quote unquote also the removal color. How did it take this long to get Skyclave Apparition as a card? The cheap creature that destroys a creature on the way in or destroys a permanent on the way in for being quote unquote the removal color.
That brings up another question too of do you think white should have a Rex Sage? Like a real Rex Sage?
A straight Rex Sage? Yes. I've been wanting one for a very long time.
I love the dog, but it's not Rex Sage.
Yeah, at 5 mana, it's way too expensive.
Yeah, I'll just play my Disenchant and move on. It's fine.
Right.
But yeah.
And again, it ties back to what I mentioned earlier. If white were green, green has the mana production to sustain that 5 mana creature. White does not. And the thing you play at 5 mana in white has to be super impactful. It's a nice little removal on a creature, but it's not impactful enough. What card I do run, and a card that I do actually like a lot, is Cavalier Dawn.
Yes. Yeah, fantastic card.
Yeah, it's a great card. It's a little costly. Triple white is a little rough. At 5 mana, it's not coming down the same time Rex Sage is coming down. But there's enough other abilities on there to offset the fact that it's 5 mana. It does enough good things and it is impactful enough. But yeah, the dog that's only Rex Sage, but for 5 mana, like that's too much, right? Like there's,
Mhm.
blowing up a single target for 5 mana isn't really worth it. A 3/4 is fine, but it doesn't change the landscape of the game that much.
Right. And I think the big thing too with Cavalier of Dawn is the emphasis on how important it is for a white card to be able to target its own stuff. The fact that you can give yourself a 3/3 golem is like a nice floor on that card.
Oh, the floor of
And you
that
get
card is that I target itself, get the 3/3 golem, and I get a feast and famine back in my hand.
right, right. I and that maybe brings up the whole. I don't know how much we want to delve into Divine Gambit, but if Divine
Oh.
Gambit targeted itself, or targeted your own stuff, I can't imagine how excited people would be about that silly
Yeah,
uncommon,
that
rather
would be
than
the
enrage over a silly uncommon.
that would be the one change for that card that would make it awesome. I
Mhm.
would happily trade 2 cards to get a Sun Titan in on like turn 2 or 3.
Right, right.
You,
Which maybe that's like way too broken, but
is it?
you know,
I'm spending a bunch of cards to do it, right? And it's a Sun
right.
Titan,
You're
like you can shoot it. I mean, I
right.
guess
You're
it could,
2-for-1ing yourself probably.
yeah, because you have to cast the card and then you have to destroy your permanent. So and then you're putting a card from your hand into play. So like when you do this, you're losing a thing in play. You're losing a card from your hand and you're casting a card from your hand. You're
Mhm.
basically going to be empty-handed and down a permanent. You're not like
Right.
completely empty-handed, but like you're going to be very low on cards after doing this. So like that play needs to be worth it. So the number of things that you can get that are quote unquote worth it, probably a pretty small list. Sun Titan,
Yeah.
maybe an Elishnorn, maybe an Ugin. Probably various planeswalkers might be worth it if they generate enough value, but like,
Hmm.
White's planeswalker is kind of lacking compared to like other colors. They generally
Yeah.
don't make mana. They
Is
don't.
anyone scared of my Gideon Jura?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's fine. I like
Hmm.
Gideon Jura. I think it's cool,
Yeah,
but
for sure.
uh, they're not as scary as like, okay, get this Garruk into play, untap 2 lands every turn, or get a
Right.
Kiora, more lands, more draw. They don't generate value that same way. So yeah, like even if it could target itself in a mono white list, uh, there's only a handful of cards I would use it on, and maybe use it late in the game just to like cost reduce a Sun Titan or something like that. But to me, it's kind of fine, right? I'm spending a lot of resources to do it.
Right. What do you think of corollary to that? What do you think of Angelic Ascension? We got that card this turn. I've gotten to cast it a couple times. I
I gotta
really
look
like
that
the
one up.
card.
Give me one moment.
Ooh, no problem. It's 1 and a white. You exile a creature or planeswalker, and they get a 4/4 angel,
Yeah. Okay. Yep.
and
I
it's an
remember.
uncommon.
So it's playable, but a 4/4 flyer is much more impactful than a 3/3 on the ground.
True, 100% true.
So like, the thing with a 3/3 on the ground is that it gets chump blocked and blocked by medium to big size creatures and isn't that much of a problem usually. A 4/4 in the air, like flying in Commander, reads as unblockable most of the time.
Right.
Most people, especially if you run into like value players, most value creatures don't fly. So if you have things with flying, your opponents can't block it. So
Mhm.
if you're trying to protect a planeswalker or something like that, I think the 4/4 in the air I think is a little bit too strong. Now, if
Mhm.
the choice is between that and no removal spell at all, then I'd probably go that. So like again, newer players, precons, lower power settings, you can make something like that work. But
Mhm.
I think a 4/4 is just a little bit too impactful, especially with the
Mhm.
flying.
It's worth it though too to note that because I've used it in this method of I'm gonna make a 4/4 and swing a 4/4 at you.
Yeah,
Now,
you used it
granted, it was like
proactively, like
yeah, like it was to swing the game so that I eliminated a player. But once again, it's just nice to have white cards that can target your own things, and it just gives them that little added piece of versatility that you just so desperately want in any monocolor deck, I think, but especially in mono white.
yeah. One of the things I think is with a lot of white cards, they just overcomplicate it. Like they put too many conditions and too much wording.
What's
And
that Kaldheim Angel? That's literally there's just too many words on that card.
which one you're talking about?
Resplendent Marshal. It's a 1 and a white and or 1 white white. And I would read this paragraph, but it fills up the entire card, like every inch of space.
Yeah, and
And there's
that's
about yeah,
kind of like the thing that like bothers me is that like these cards, if you made them simple, more simple, then they'd actually be better. It's like right once you start adding all of
right.
these here, you ready? I'm gonna give this a go.
Go for it. I'm so prepared.
3 mana, 3/3 flying. When it enters the battlefield or dies, You may exile another creature card from your graveyard. When you do, put a +1/+1 counter on each creature you control other than this creature that shares a creature type with the exiled card. There's so many conditions on that. Like, all right,
It's just too many words.
why do you need to have the creature type thing at the bottom there where it says that shares a creature type with the exile card? Why? If I'm already playing this thing and already exiling a creature from my graveyard, why then do I have to also meet the creature type to be like tribal, essentially?
I love tribal decks too, and this card's just too many words for me to want to play. I don't want to have to read this to
Yeah,
everybody at the table and then explain exactly what I'm doing.
right. Compare that to a card that I actually really like, and I get it, like I play an angel deck, but Starnheim Aspirant. Angel spells you cast cost 2 less to cast. Nice and simple. One
Yeah.
sentence. It takes up one line of text, and I'm like, okay, cool. This card is playable to me in some decks.
Hmm.
And, I think they've gotten so complicated with the wording for white cards and putting all these drawbacks in that drawbacks, conditions, restrictions that it makes the cards worse. Like this thing is just like, okay, cool. It's nice and simple. I played in an angel deck. Done.
And they're drawbacks that don't appeal to the Johnny side of me. They aren't hoops to jump through to get a cool effect. They're hoops to jump through so that you have to jump.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Like it's not I do this thing and I win the game, or I generate absurd amounts of mana, or generate absurd amounts of like anything, like any resource. It's do all this stuff, get a 4/4.
Hmm. Which, like Luminous Broodmoth, that is a cool hoop to jump through, right? Like, don't
Yeah.
have creatures with flying, like, and then you get a flying thing back. Like, it's a weird card to build around. That appeals to the Johnny side of me, but just it's also a much simpler card to read. Like, as soon as you start adding in all these, as soon as you add in more words, it's just diminishing returns, right? I just
Yeah.
become less and less interested.
Yeah. And even to some extent, like Angel of Destiny, cool card, but there's enough wording on there that like you can't just run it everywhere.
Right.
One of the questions I have is why does it gain your opponent's life? Like,
Right.
why does
So
it need to do that?
I
You've
guess so you're
already got the
committed.
condition of you have to be at 55, and
Mhm.
sure, it'll gain you a lot of life. I get that, but like, why?
Yeah, it just it's kind of weird because it just makes it a much harder card to play in a mono white deck
Yeah,
because now you play this card and you're committed to a singular strategy. Once again, love this card. Such a cool card. Print more cards like this card. But there's an added condition to it of like if I'm a combat deck, I am saying I am no longer trying to kill you by dealing lethal damage. I'm on this other plan,
yeah.
which is tough.
Essentially, it's almost like Infect. Like, it's a very similar concept where
Right.
you don't want to split between Infect and regular damage because you're, probably not going to be able to finish either strategy. Triumph of the Hordes excluded, but yeah, it's the same thing with Angel of Destiny. Is that like, okay, by playing this, it can give me the ability to win the game, but now it shuts off my regular ability to win the game, which is just attacking you with 2/2s, and that's not great. You can still get people with commander damage lethal, so relevant to me, Boros
Oh,
Voltron.
that's
So
neat.
yeah, so that damage doesn't go away, but
That's very neat.
yeah, but still, it's like everything on that card is great up to that one point. Like,
Right.
right, you pull off that one point, and now you've got a really cool white card.
Oh yeah. And I feel like it doesn't change. It changes the playability slightly, does it? But it doesn't change the impact of the card. Like it's still a threat you have to remove.
Yep.
It's still going to most likely win you the game by gaining you life, not by dealing combat damage.
Yep.
So the functionality, it feels like added text that changes the functionality in a not positive way. The
Exactly.
cost of the text is too high.
Right. And you know what I mean? Like, there's already a condition on that card, which is the 55 life. Why do you then have to do this other thing? Like, why do you always have to give something back? And that's one of the like deeply frustrating things. One of my slogans has been stop putting drawbacks on white cards. That's the drawback of this card, is that now they gain a bunch of life. And if you think about it, if you go deep with this card, like, all right, I attack them, I'm not at 55 yet, I gain some life back, maybe I get to like 40 something, and now they've gained a bunch of life back. That means that another player at the table can't take them out as easily because they may have gained 20 life.
They'll stay at their life total, right? They don't gain life.
No, they gain life, right? Let me read it again.
I think if they're at 30 and you deal 10, they lose 10, then gain 10 back.
Oh, is that how it works?
This second failure in math is brought to you by my awesome Patreons. If you want to help support the channel and vote on which decks I play next, feel free to check out my Patreon. Link is in the description below.
I think their life total basically you can't change anyone's life total by combat damage.
Let me read it. Whenever a creature you
Yeah.
control deals combat damage to a player, you and that player each gain that much. Okay, yeah. So they gain the life back. Yeah, okay. So they stay at the same life total. But still, it's like, if I could put that player to like 6, then, I gain my life and now I'm in the 40s, so I'm very close to the Angel of Destiny clause. I can't necessarily, like, if they were in the 20s beforehand, they're still going to be in the 20s. Someone else can't just like send some random flyer over their way and take them out easily, right? It's kind of a task, and that player's still very much in the game.
Right. It would serve as an iteration on True Conviction, kind of, if it didn't have that text.
Yep.
Because True Conviction is a huge life swing, and that's exactly what this card provides. Is a
Yep.
huge life swing with an added win condition. You, in exchange for the added win condition, you lose the double strike. So, and it's easier to remove.
Yep.
So, yeah, it would have been a nice iteration on True Conviction. As it is, it's kind of its own unique card to itself.
Yeah. And
it goes well with True Conviction, though.
Yes, it certainly does. I saw one of these yesterday in a game that I was playing. It was in a Samut deck, and the first player lost to Angel of Destiny on turn 4.
Oh wow!
Yeah, it was very fast, and then none of us could really had the removal to deal with it. The Samut was making a lot of mana, so it was, that's how that game went. A couple turns later, it got the rest of us, but. Yeah, it's pretty good. So, like, it's good, but it's also, like, my life total didn't change. I wasn't then down to, like, 6 life, where, if someone wanted to get me with a couple 2/2s, then.
Yeah.
Yeah, so, and that's the thing. Here's one I want to look at. Cartographer's Hawk. Played this guy at all?
I have not played this card.
Nor should you. Nor should you.
I'm trying to... So I heard someone compare Cartographer's Hawk to the dwarf from Kaldheim that...
Not at all the same.
Foretell. Yeah, I don't... But they were suggesting that Cartographer's Hawk was more playable than that guy. I don't think I agree with that.
No.
Cartographer's Hawk plays extremely slow, right? Like, there's no... Ideal situation is you play it on turn 2.
Yep.
On turn 3, you swing, you hit somebody with more lands than you.
Yep.
You get a plains to the battlefield, you return Cartographer's Hawk to your hand, and then you recast it.
Yep.
So, like... But then you're done. Like,
but that land comes in tapped.
Oh, so you have to wait another
there's like a full 2-turn lag time between you casting that card and getting a land. So you cast it on 2, you swing on 3, tapped land. You can finally use that land on turn 4.
And it's the antithesis to Keeper of the Cord, right? Where Keeper of the Cord is a card that you want to be behind, but there's a lot of ways to exploit being behind and to take advantage of it.
Yep.
And Cartographer's Hawk, you want to be behind, but as soon as you utilize it, you're not behind anymore and you're done. Like, you've got in your land. Congratulations.
Yep. Yeah. And it's just I've looked at this card a lot. I did a whole video on this card. So why?
Love the art, though.
Yeah, cool art. But why so many conditions?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? You have the condition of the land comes in tapped. They have to have more life than you. It bounces itself. Right? Like, it's not that good of a card. Even if you remove all that stuff, let's just say it was a 2/2 that, like, hits and is basically Sword of the Animist. Right. So you hit them, you get a land, it's tapped. Even if that were the case, that's still, like, not that strong. It's fine.
Right.
It's
what
good.
If they put Exert on it? If they wanted to slow you down, just throw Exert on it.
Yeah.
Like, you can exert it, you get a land, but then you can't use it next turn.
Right. The fact that you then have to spend more mana to recast it, like, makes it really painful. I think it almost could have been playable if the land came in untapped. Right? Like, if I could pick and choose my spots where I'm like, okay, I'm going to Hawk right now, get this land, and get it untapped. Or if it just stayed in play. Like, why does it also have to bounce?
I think I'd be cool if it put the land in hand and just stayed in play. I think I'd be more excited about that card.
The one thing I would say with that is that you have other cards that put lands in hand already. Right. I'm a big fan of Gift of Estates, and if I've got the budget, I'll use Land Tax Tithe, Gift of Estates in a deck. Right. And generally, if I do that, I'll probably cheat on the land count a little bit. I'll probably get down to like 35 or so. Mm-hmm. But I love those type of cards. I wouldn't run the Hawk in that iteration over those type of cards. So, any other white cards you wanted to talk about? Things you liked, things you didn't like from the past year or so?
I mean, just like a general, I feel like we've been a little bit negative. I definitely love the direction white is headed. Like, I do get excited for the new white cards that are printed. I understand that they come with problems, but like, I encourage everyone to look at the commons and uncommons because that's going to give you insight into where the direction White's headed. Great example is the Birth of Meletus, which you're probably not going to play this in your commander deck, but it is a 2-drop that searches for basic planes and puts it into your hand, and then has other effects on top of it, which just gets me excited because I like that aspect of White. I like the tutor for lands and put them in my hand aspect of White.
Yep.
Um, and so that's just an indicator that hey, they do recognize that hey, we need more cards like Land Tax and Gift of Estates that maybe aren't as good, but if you're looking to play on a budget or you're just looking for a second copy, then you can throw this card into your deck. So I'm definitely excited for the direction that White is headed in general.
Yeah, it feels like they're trying, but what feels bad to me is I feel like there are successes, but I also feel like they're missing at a higher clip. And what's painful is they're missing with mythic rares more than I'd like them to be.
I wonder if that's so. Like, if you think of the 5-year plan that I kind of outlined, I wonder if they're hesitant because I've heard a couple of different people voice the opinion that White needs cards that are more aggressive so that it can catch up. Like they should just print a crazy White card, even if it's completely absurd as a card, so that White can catch up. And the thing that concerns me is that's irreparable damage. If
Yeah,
if they are planning this, if their goal is a 5-year plan where we're getting cards like Jessica's Will in White,
it's
then
a crazy card.
then you can't go back and fix that other card that you printed that was broken so
Right.
that
And
it's
I get
corrected.
that, but it's also like the other colors just have a plethora of those cards.
Right.
If you like go to CEDH, CDH is like basically a CDH deck list is like these are all the mistakes ever printed in Magic.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So like they exist in the other colors. As far as I'm aware, White has one Smothering Tithe. Smothering Tithe
Right.
is like it's the only white card you can play that's just like, oops, I win the game because I have all the
hmm
mana now. What are your thoughts on Smothering Tithe?
Yeah, I don't play Smothering Tithe because it's such a game warping card, and also because it's so expensive. Um, I do think the card's cool. I have it in one deck, and it's really cool in that deck. It's a mono white deck. The thing about Smothering Tithe is in a mono white deck, that card is like super fair. Everyone's still having a good time. And as soon as you add another color, that card goes crazy.
Yep.
Which isn't necessarily a bad thing. Cards are supposed to get better when you add more colors. You're not really supposed to play a monocolored deck in any format. You're usually supposed to add other colors to it. So that doesn't bother me. I just want another iteration on Smothering Tithe because I'd like a cheaper version.
I personally would like a cheaper and slightly more fair version of Smothering
Yeah,
Tithe. Smothering
yeah,
Tithe is so strong that like I've started to nickname it the Destroyer of Games. Um,
absolutely.
I've got this God Eternal Oketra deck that it was built out of leftovers of another mono white deck, so it's like not a super well tuned version of God
hmm
Eternal Oketra. It's only ever won one game in the 5 or 6 that I've played with it, and that's because I went Mana Vault into Smothering Tithe.
Yeah.
And you know what I mean? Like even when the cards I have in the deck they're fine, being able to cast 4 of them on turn 3 or 4 does make the deck much better than it would be otherwise. So,
hmm
I've been starting to think like, maybe Smothering Tithe isn't a card you run in Casual Commander. I mean, it's frustrating because like your choices for mana production beyond that are not amazing.
Yeah. You get
It's
Knight of the White Orchid
yeah,
and Core Cartographer, and then all the mana rocks.
right. And so White's big problem is it doesn't have burst mana.
Exactly.
The
Yeah.
other colors have burst mana, Jessica's Will, Mana Geyser, Cabal Coffers, mana doublers, whatever else. They exist. Green has all the mana.
hmm
So you can't get like these bursts of mana. Smothering Tithe is like the one card that allows you to do that, but it's also just like too good. uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
and also because of it, the fact it's too good, like people shoot it a lot. Like if you just try to cast it on turn 4, it's probably not going to survive because it can't.
hmm Yeah, and that's the experience that I've had is I might get 1 or 2 treasures off of it, and someone might pay for it, but eventually somebody's gonna draw naturally a removal spell for that card
Yep.
when I cast on turn 4. Because I don't play fast mana in any of my decks. I just tend to like slower, grindier games,
Yep.
and so I usually cast a fair Smothering Tithe, which is fair. Like it's in that context, usually you are not going crazy with it.
Yeah, and I will say that like if I see a Smothering Tithe with a lot of treasures, most of the time, 75% of the time, Multicolor deck, that deck's going to win the game. They're just producing
Yeah.
too much mana not to. Mono white is the only color where I see the Smothering Tithe with 30 treasures and they literally run out of things to do and can't win the game.
Yeah, I played against a mono white deck. I actually wasn't playing mono white. I was playing mono blue. I played against a mono white deck. They had Smothering Tithe and a handful of lands.
Yep.
And I just drew, like, I realized pretty quickly, okay, this person does not have anything to do. I gave them like 90 treasures and won the game.
Yeah.
That was it.
And
Game over.
that doesn't happen in the other colors because every other
No.
color draws cards. Eventually, they just like, okay, however inefficient this draw card is, I still use it and it gets me more stuff. And then I keep playing and, you know, I spiral and eventually I win. Yeah, mono white's the only one that like stalls when having 30 treasures in play, which, yeah, it doesn't feel great. Doesn't feel great.
Yeah, it's a little awkward.
Any final thoughts?
Yeah, I just generally would say that I think white is headed in the right direction. One thing that really gives me hope, because this is important to me as someone who enjoys playing mono white because they like the experience and the play patterns of mono white, is while burst mana, card draw, and game kind of finishers are all things that are necessary in Commander, it's really important to me personally that they still feel uniquely white. Great example is a Chroma's Will. It feels like a white card, but it's also a card that can end the game. And so that Ari posted a kind of reflection on 2020 where he clearly emphasized, we're going to print cards that win the game in white, but they're still going to feel like white cards. And for me, that's really important because I do like the linear growth, that feeling of unity that white has, that you have to have the culmination of many cards working together in order to win the game, which is a deficiency in white, but it's also a really good feeling when you get to do that, and it feels very white when you do it. So that's I'm looking forward to some of the flavorful white cards that answer some of the problems that you brought up.
Yeah, and we've touched upon all these things already. Is that like, I think part of it's a lack of creativity. You know, we talked about the tweet with Starnheim or with Kaldheim and Avacyn Restored. I think it's like they haven't been as creative with the cards as they could be. Even if the cards aren't the best, like the Broodmoth is that perfect example of, I can't use Broodmoth everywhere, but at least it's new. And I can use it somewhere. Where with Starnheim Unleashed, it's not really even a new card in my mind. It's a card that I've had 7 times already. And, you know, to me, it's like, well, I just file it away with the other 7, you know, wherever I want those. Maybe I want this one, but
probably the trade binders where they're going.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, but I think it comes back to that, you know, I did a video a little over a year ago of like my own white designs that there's so many things they can explore that they just haven't. And, you know, that's what gets me frustrated, but it also leaves me hopeful that eventually, like, if they figure it out, there are a lot of really cool proactive ways that white can win the game, that they need to unlock it, basically. Like, they need to get it into their head, like, okay, we need to stop doing the thing that we've been doing and just, you know, make new white cards, make them new and exciting and just things we haven't seen before, or iterate on cards that are already good in a way that makes it new and interesting. You know, we talked about iterating a little bit. Skyclave Apparition. I want to see more Skyclave Apparitions. They don't necessarily all need to be as good as Skyclave, but even if they're like close, maybe a little bit less good, I still want more copies of that card in my deck. You know, if I can have 2 or 3 Skyclave Apparitions, then that's going to be really cool. I'm going to be able to play some cheap creatures and get rid of all these problems, similar to the way that like many other colors do at this point. And I can also get those creatures back with like Revelark and Sun Titan and all that fun stuff. So,
and Skyclave too. Skyclave's great because it's a card that you can play it fair and it does a good job, and you can also play it unfairly. You can sack it before you actually exile the thing, and it does great there too. Like it you can make it better, but you can also play it fairly, and it's still a completely acceptable card.
Yeah, and that's a great point.
That's something we really need.
And that's a great point too, and you can see that in a few cards. You can see that with Heliod. Heliod gives you the potential to be a literal CEDH deck, but you can choose not to do that. You can choose not to play the most powerful combo with Heliod, but it's still a good card even if you don't. And that's what I think they need to grasp with, is that you need to print powerful cards and cards that will combo in white, and kind of let the player, or the deck builder decide just how strong they want to go with that card, right? All the other colors, they kind of get that decision. Like if you're playing mono black, all right, I could just run coffers and tutor my way into a Torment of Hellfire and like, basically try not to interact with the board in any other meaningful way other than just making 20 mana to cast this thing. Or I can choose not to do that if I don't want to. One that's been near and dear to me, it's been on my mind a lot. If you print a second Karmic Guide type card, just ETBs reanimates a creature, that basically goes infinite with Karmic Guide Sack Outlet, and that card will be good. You can choose to combo it if you want to, but you don't have to if you don't want to. And that's like a really easy win that I think they could print, and hasn't happened yet. So, and there's a lot of those. There's a lot of cards like that. It's like, okay, if you just print this one thing, now it's up to the players if they want to combo it or not. And that kind of gets into the Rule Zero conversation, which is, a whole nother topic. But with that, I think that's a good place to wrap up. Thank you so much for joining me today. Where can people find your stuff?
Yeah, so if you want to check out anything that I do, it pretty much all revolves around Twitter at the moment. It's at MonoWhiteBorder on Twitter. And from there, you'll see a link to my blog this year. I'm focusing on building and then tuning a deck of just 2020 cards as kind of a spiritual removal from 2020, as well as a closer look into the white cards of the year of Commander and just get more experience with them. So
yeah, I wanted to mention, by the way, I love that experiment. When Throne of Eldraine came out, I made it an adventure tribal deck because I didn't really know how to evaluate the adventure cards, so I just jammed them all in a deck, and it was actually a pretty cool time. So
absolutely, it's really fun to play, and I have an introduction. My introduction post on that explains the rules that I'm following. I've had a couple people who have jumped on it, and they're doing the same thing. I definitely encourage you to try it out. Not with mono white necessarily, but with any color combination or commander from 2020.
Right, just like pick a theme that you're like, you know what? I haven't played enough of this. I want to try more of it, and I want to like remove myself from the staples that I usually use to win every game.
Yep.
It's a nice little exercise to be like, okay, I can actually evaluate these cards, and like for me, it's like, okay, I need to not run Sword of Feast and Famine in every deck that I play. So, you know what I mean?
You don't need to, but maybe you want to.
Oh man, it's so good. It's just so good. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. I am PJ. This is Commander Replay, and I hope we'll have more episodes like this in the future. So until next time, take care and see you guys later.